So welcome to this webinar. I get asked a lot about working with children, young people. So what we're going to do today is talk about the considerations that you as a mindfulness teacher or an educator, somebody that's already trained or looking to be trained in mindfulness and compassion, the sort of things that you need to think about in order to teach mindfulness to children and young people. So a little bit of background is with Mindfulness UK, we did have a programme in 2006 that we took into schools called Minding Your Health. We took it into several schools and it was really well received. And it was different to other mindfulness and compassion programs out there. One being there wasn't a lot of teaching about compassion back when we were doing that in about 2016. And we don't have a program, a set program that we sort of say, oh, take this into, and this works with this age group, with these types of people, because the way that Mindfulness UK work, and as many of you know, because you're on a teacher training program, is there's so many variables and dependencies, and it all depends on what's going on for that child and young person, what the setting is, kind of what the safeguarding is that's already in place around it. But what we are going to talk about is how you can put all those considerations in place and create yourself an action plan or um, just kind of familiarize yourself with it. And also how you can adapt some of the practices and some ideas around props and things that you can use to bring this to life a little bit. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of like set programs for children and young people. Um, I'm not dissing them. I'm just saying that's not how we work as an organization. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you. I have got a PowerPoint. There's not lots and lots of slides, so I will take you through it and it gives the session some structure. Okay, so teaching mindfulness and compassion with children and young people. So thinking about really thoughtful, safe and sensitive delivery for younger participants. So often, and this is changed and shifts in schools, and people that work with young people are far more aware through the pandemic, especially about trauma-informed approaches. But it's really important that you're working, if you are going to go into organisations, for instance, that they don't see it as therapy, that they don't see it as a sort of behavioural management. It's like it should be a fun thing that you're bringing to enhance the well-being of children and young people. So often uh, things that are around well-being are delivered and perhaps targeting children and young people that have got behavioural difficulties, and they're often the people that are most in need of that because behaviour is communication. But it's really important that you as a mindfulness teacher aren't make the organisation or the people that are being involved in who you're teaching to really understand that this is for everybody, and it should be fun and it should be compassionate, and people, the children, young people that attended should feel really safe and welcome in that environment, not there because they're some kind of problem. So it's grounded, it's age appropriate, that it's really supportive, and it's grounded in the needs of those children and young people. So why this work matters, and why, really caring about this work. And obviously you're attending today, you're interested in this webinar. So, I can really trust that it's something that you feel passionate about as well. That the well-being of children is really is paramount, of course, and it's really needed, especially in teenagers 16 to 25. In a study about loneliness, are said to be the most lonely and feeling the most disconnected from society. So we know that mindfulness really promotes connection. It's not on the screen. I mean, they might be accessing it on the screen, but it's not about screen. There's so much research, isn't there, out there now and coming to light about um, the detrimental effect of doom scrolling and things like that, and that children, are still developing emotionally, socially, neurologically, and that connection to you as a mindfulness teacher. And don't underestimate the absolute magnificence in you being a person in a child and young person's life that is showing up, on a regular basis, that is regulated, that is present, that is open to hearing what they want to say, because that's what mindfulness is, isn't it? Teaching in it, mindfulness and compassion to have an experience and then being open to whatever that child or young person's experience is, that they can share that, whether that they're journaling it or they're telling you about it and you're really, really listening. That in itself is something that is just huge, that when I've taught children, young people, they really appreciate and they really find that calming, and it helps them to regulate and to be present themselves, so we know this. So that's, the responsibility around us delivering, if we're going to go ahead and do that, that the delivery needs to be paced and contained and responsive, rather than all other things that are taught generally to children are goal orientated, aren't they? Whereas mindfulness is non-striving and compassion is bringing kindness into whatever that experience is, and being active in that, placing your hands on your chest or maybe using something to soothe. Um, so it's responsive, whereas other things that children are taught is, can you do this by the end of the session? You'll be able to. So it's really important to keep hold of that and not get caught up in a kind of curriculum, really, which is what I was saying at the beginning. So, but it can also be boundaries, so there's being really clear around, I'm going to teach a practice, the duration is going to be, 1 or 2 minutes or whatever it is. And I just want you to listen to me and pay attention to this. And that's all I want you to do. And then sticking to that. So, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So then you'll get somebody, tapping you or whatever and saying, oh, can I, just ask you a question, and you have to be bounded around that because your practice is the practice, and they get really used to that very quickly and settle. It's amazing. I watched a documentary years ago around it was about around a doctor investigating mindfulness as a in response to, children who were on meds. And the first session, it was just chaos. This mindfulness teacher was teaching, and it was chaotic. And, there was children fidgeting around, children being children and young people being young people. But what was also amazing was just to go with that. And it was just brilliant to see how quickly, through that routine and being supported and boundaried and kind of age appropriate resources, how quickly those children and young people, kind of like we do with our own mindfulness experience, just right, we're going to do mindfulness practice now. And they were there and they were present, they were able to do it. And that's my experience as well of when I went into schools. There was it's not a criticism, because this is what TAs and teachers, spend a lot of their time doing, is trying to manage people's behaviour. And that isn't what a mindfulness and compassion practice is. If someone's fidgeting, it's fine. They're fidgeting, that's their experience. So it's not about being bounded in that way, just being bounded in your delivery and being really clear around expectations. And that really helps everybody feel really safe and cared about. So it helps children, young people, in the same way as it does adults, to build awareness and steadiness. They know what to expect, and kindness. You're offering kindness, you're modeling that. You're modeling being kind to yourself, which is really important, because often children, young people are seeing their parents, doing a lot, juggling a lot. They're seeing teachers, the stress levels in teachers is huge, so it's all very goal orientated. So if there's pockets of time that we can offer to children, young people, where there is a steadiness there, and there is a genuine offer of, this is what we're going to do for the next few minutes, and then we're going to talk about it, they start to feel safe enough to receive it. And the value of those practices, to support their feelings, to be with their feelings, to settle, to pay attention, And then to recognize their needs. Oh, I'm hungry, or I'm thirsty, or I need to move, or I really need to ask that question, or I need to talk to somebody, or whatever, has a ripple effect in their relationships. Not only in wherever they're accessing education, but with their families, with their friendships as well. So there's some foundations to consider around, just like there is with adults, but for safe delivery. So this container matters, and I'm talking about like creating a safe space, a safe container for which the practice needs to happen with, minimal distractions if possible, but sometimes it's not, and teaching people to be with and having some relational safety. So always, as I'm sure you would as a trained mindfulness teacher or an educator working health and social care, whatever, always being warm, leaving your stuff at the door, being in a place where you're grounded, you're able to offer warmth, there's predictability. People get caught up in mindfulness, being repetitive. Oh, can't be repetitive. And there's safety in repetition. People like repetition. Children do. If you think about all the things you learned as a child, like nursery rhymes and um, counting games and songs and things like that, they're very repetitive. And actually, it can really help people feel safe and secure. And there's clear expectations that have said really helps people settle. And it's invitational. There's not a pressure. There's choice. And in our trauma informed practice, we talk a lot about choice because opt in language. So if it feels right for you, I invite you to. If it doesn't feel right for you, maybe there's another alternative, like we say, close eyes or leave eyes open or choose your position. That opt-in language protects agency, and agency is really important for children, young people to take responsibility in a safe way for their own practice and build the trust in that practice and trust in you and trust in themselves as well. And that kind of autonomy is really empowering and helps raise self-esteem um, and confidence. So if they can be confident in this practice and they're not told, oh no, that's wrong, like when we genuinely do inquiry and we invite it and we just say, gosh, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that on and teach them about how mindfulness is or what's compassionate about that response, or maybe making an offer of something they could do in their lives. They're building that confidence in, oh, I have got this right. Oh, and it's amazing. You see that embodiment coming through quite quickly. Because children and young people are receptive, receptive learners if they feel safe and there's choice and it's done in this, in a safe way. So keeping those practices short, keeping them simple. So you might want to simplify your language. Don't be frightened about repetition and well scaffolded. So what I mean by that is, really reminding people if your mind wanders off, don't worry about it, bring it back to the practice. But also using props. So props are really good, and I will talk you through some props that I've tried and tested. Really, really good ways of working with people, especially at first. And then you can kind of let go of that, just like you do with adults. They get used to it, they get used to the language. So you might not need to scaffold it quite as much. Um, so the boundaries, as I said before, knowing what the practice is for. We're going to pay attention to the breath coming out of the nose, or we're going to move our our bodies in the space that we're in, keeping our feet on the floor. So knowing what that practice is for and when a different response kind of is needed, and asking throughout that practice, asking yourself, looking around, is this practice helping this young person feel more grounded or overwhelmed? And then you can respond to that. If, for example, um, I've done a grounding practice with somebody before. It was incredibly hard for them to keep still. So because of that, tension of keeping still, I just watched and gave the instruction to, if it's useful, you can shift your body weight from one foot to another. if that's useful for you and that helps you feel more grounded or have a wider stance. So there's lots of things that you can do if you looking around and you're like, oh, that young person looks like they could do with some differentiation, which is kind of what we're talking about here, then feel free to do that. Be brave with it, be brave with your offer, or model it to say, I find it useful. I find it useful. Find it hard to stand still, find it useful to do this. Um, yeah, so adapting practices to children, young people, keeping it short and concrete. So really unambiguous language. So notice your feet on the floor rather than sort of trying to be abstract with it. Like quite often this is my experience and it's not dissing other people because they might have find that useful, but there's kind of a lot of analogies that people use. Like they'll say like a I don't know, like a tiger walking through a forest, and then immediately, they're in this imagination, this different part of their brain, and that can be really tricky for people. So just keeping it really simple. Notice your feet on the floor, and that often lands better than kind of trying to be creative with it. That's all you're asking to do. So what's the simplest way, the shortest way I can say this? And you can use fun things like I've got children to draw around their feet before, and then they get their feet out of their tray and they put their feet on the floor and they plant their feet on their feet, and that kind of works. And if somebody needs a more sensory way of being with the practice, you can get like I don't know if people have seen um, foot shapes that you use in the shower, and they're sort of spiky, and you use them to wash your feet in the shower. You might have seen them. You can get them pretty much anywhere, and they've got suctions on the bottom. So if people, children, young people are a bit fidgety, or through an initial assessment, or that they're neurodiverse perhaps, and they'd be really helpful for them to have some sensory stuff. Bring some sensory things in like that. So put your feet on there and really feel your feet on there. What does that feel like? Um, so breathing can really help with mindfulness. But sometimes that's not an ideal starting point. That's something to bring into your practice, that breath awareness. And I'm going to show you something that really helps with children and breath in a moment. But sometimes it's external sounds that are the way in. So, like, using the five senses, using sound, using touch, sight, stretching, moving, walking, or just simply holding an object. Stillness is not the only route in. It's often, in my experience, it's often what comes from teaching mindfulness, more stillness. But the ask for children and young people to be still is, yeah, it's not what I offer, first of all. So you're offering invitations and making it clear it's not tests, because they're tested on everything, aren't they? Children, young people, if they're in education particularly. So there's no right way to feel. We're making room for noticing. We're expecting the attention to wander off. So this is where analogies do come in helpful, like, you say, who's got a puppy or a kitten, or, and what happens when you ask that puppy to come back? No, they wandered off again. Oh, I've got to round them up, bring them back, you know, like likening that to a puppy or something like that. So it's endearing. It's not naughty. It's an endearing being that, oh gosh, my mind's wandered off again. Oh, in it comes, bring it back. Um, and acknowledging discomfort and non-participation without shame. There's so just that genuine offer of like, would you like to, engage in some movement? I invite you to feel your feet on the floor. And if someone's not ready for that, just they're not ready for that. They'll trust that you modeling it and the way that you're teaching will make people feel safe. You don't need to point out, anybody that's not participating. It's just you participate in the way that you need to. So that relational, in terms of relation between you and your cohort or your children, your young people, that co-regulation matters. Your tone, that gentle tone. There's often children who are on the experiencing end of, you know, um, a kind of sharpness or a raise in tone. They're looking, they're super sensitive to that. Or am I doing this right? And if you need to be really gentle with your pacing, your tone, so that it's not sending a message, and that they know that when they're teaching that they're with you, you're present, you're regulated yourself, and that it's always gentle, always warm, and that tone, pacing, and responsiveness may be more important than the script that you're following, So it's just more about, very much about being with, and staying regulated yourself and being comfortable. If you're not comfortable with working in, what do they say, never work with children or animals, you have to be comfortable yourself. So if you're offering movement to children, young people, you have to be very comfortable with the movements that you're offering yourself, because they know, and that makes them feel unsafe or uncomfortable, or, and you might get some behavior. So, really thinking about what you need as a mindfulness teacher. What do I need to feel confident, and so that I can stay regulated, and not feel self-conscious or whatever, So adapting your practices for you as well for that delivery. So teaching compassion without overwhelm. So it's a bit like if you've come on teacher training with us before, you'll know about the circles of safety. So this is a kind of different way of looking at it. So compassion can be taught as gentle. So talking about noticing the difficulty and acknowledging it, and then softening around the response. What's the most helpful thing that you could do? So they might be noticing, something around, a pain in their body, or their mind's racing or really full, and can they bring a softness to that? And softness might be, like a touch. Could they like gently do gentle raindrops on the head or something like that, and just acknowledge it, and a supportive pause? Can they put their hands on their heart? Can they give themselves a little hug or do some butterfly taps? Can they ask for help, or just offering space? It's not, compassion isn't a disclosure or any sort of emotional intensity. You don't need to, we're not working therapeutically in that way. So it's just, gosh, that sounds, difficult. And I wonder if there's something that you could do, some way of moving, or, building on the skills that you're teaching them, something that you've watched them enjoy before. I wonder if that might be useful here. But keeping it ordinary, actionable, easy. So there's some facilitator, that's you use a mindfulness teacher, watch outs. So, what's really positive, just to summarize, is clear opt-in language. So you've got to give choices, and really mean that. Simple instructions, visible grounding options, normalizing different experiences, willingness to stop or pause or shorten a practice. And then what you might want to pause and rethink around considerations of teaching children, young people, not to have long inward practices. So keep it kind of outwards with a bit of breath awareness and awareness of the thought. You can build on awareness of what's happening, in the mind, body, and the heart, but not long inward practices. Not pressure, no pressure to share personal feelings. Some children, just like adults, some they do want to tell you everything, in detail, and some want time to process, and they might benefit from a journal or something like that, some kind of pack that they can just write a few things down, and really encouraging them to journal, because it's a fantastic way in, avoiding language that implies failure. Like if you start saying in inquiry, oh, good, oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed that, oh, that's so good. Then what do you say, if they say something that they perceive to be negative? And, if you start using language like that, so keep it like, um, very level, and, thank you for sharing that with me. And that sounds like it's a really mindful thing, or that's, you know, excellent awareness that you've had there. So keeping that language really positive and avoiding language that could imply failure, because you're building mindfulness, builds self-esteem, and confidence and embodiment. So, and not treating dysregulation as non-compliant. So, it's tricky if you're going into schools, if you're going into a classroom setting, because sometimes that is misconstrued, that dysregulation as non-compliance. And as a mindfulness teacher, schools are much more aware, and teachers and TAs are much more aware than they were back in the day in the 80s when I was working with children and young people. And dysregulation is not non-compliance, and also an offer to regulate when you get to know people or to use a tool. That's a really empowering way to work with somebody. So not using mindfulness as a behavior control, which I'm sure none of you would. So a gentle practice, well held, can offer a young person that choice, that steadiness, that feeling of being cared about. So start with safety, and including in that is, understanding safeguarding if that's not part of your role already, and that's a new concept to you. Bamber of the British Association of Mindfulness-Based Approaches um, you've been talking about safeguarding a lot and the need for safeguarding training for all mindfulness teachers. So if that's an area of your development, then that's really important, especially important if you're going to be teaching mindfulness and compassion to children, young people. You can adapt for the age and the context. So it might be more structured, something that you're offering. If you're going into a school, there'll probably be an expectation that it is structured. But if you're doing like a fun club or you're working one to one or something, you might make it, less structured. Adapting for age, that as a general rule of thumb, um, I found it really useful to teach for the age that they are. So if you've got 5-year-olds, no more than 5 minutes. And that's kind of a really good way of thinking about it, and looking at like age appropriate. If you're unsure about age appropriate developmental things, you can easily look up, mindfulness practices that are age appropriate for 7-year-olds, and there's a lot of information out there as well. So if you're not sure, ooh, then it's thinking about the development of the child at that age as well. So keep compassion practical, keep it boundaried, and yeah, it's just a lovely thing to do to teach children. Are very receptive in my humble opinion. So I'm just going to share with you. I think I can. I think I need to switch my screen. Ah, wait a minute. So if I do that, bear with. No, I'll just show you some live stuff. I'll just let Paris back in. So there are some really useful tools. There is so much out there. So this is something that really engages adults as well. If you're ever doing a stand, I always say that I always make Karen laugh, because I always say if you do a stand anywhere, we always have one of these, because people come over and go, what's that? And it's just beautiful for kind of breath awareness and introducing the concept of, the stomach, the belly expanding and then retracting. And you can play games with it. And as you throw it up in the air, I don't know if you can see it expands. But if you type into the internet to buy these, if you put mandala, it will come up as very expensive. But if you put in expanding ball as a toy, it's the same thing and it will come up a lot cheaper. And there are so many things that you can do with this. You can just pass it round. You can have it when people arrive and say, oh, just move this in time with the breath. And, as they arrive, we're rushing around, or, might be a bit anxious. And then, as they breathe, oh, what happens? So it just evokes curiosity. And yeah, they're just really lovely. Often props are, you don't want lots and lots of props, but I find props in a box where like it just evokes that curiosity, like what's in that box? Oh yeah, I can't wait. And then they can reach in and maybe use something. So feathers, There's these soft feathers and hard feathers. Not everybody likes feathers, of course. So I have other things to hand, like I might have something a little bit more prickly. It's still soft, it's a dried thistle, or I might have a tassel, off a curtain. I don't know what they're called. Those things that the pullbacks on the curtains, they've got little tassels. And sometimes if you go into shops that do haberdashery, they've got like a little bargain thing and they've got lots of odd bits in there. And I sometimes use those just for touch and little sounds. So it's quite nice for mindful listening if you just have like a soft sound and then they kind of put their hand up when they hear it. And that can be quite nice. And of course they can hold that and be the person that's making the sound. Different textures. So it's just got a golf ball here, but you can get, soft kind of bigger rubbery balls, more tennis balls, balls with spikes that OTs tend to use. They're all really good. Some children, in my experience, particularly if they're neurodiverse, they might be high sensory seeking. So it's very hard for them to sit or very hard for them to do a gentle practice. And often mindfulness is associated with gentleness. And actually what they might need is something quite, stimulating, like a little brush or something like that. And that's what, God, let's do a finger gratitude practice like we do on the CMR program. But instead of holding your fingers, we're just going to brush your fingers or use one of those balls or the feathers or something like that. So using props can be a really good way in, even if it's just, bringing nature in. Was like you just have some flowers, they can choose a flower, and that can be their object of reference. Um, Moving like a flower would in the wind, and all sorts of nature references. So I could go on for ages because what I love about teaching mindfulness to children and young people is that they're really up for like having fun and being creative and um, you know, being playful. And that's an energy that I really, really value and I really enjoy myself. Um, so that's what I bring to it when I teach. So there might be qualities it's sometimes good for you as a mindfulness teacher to recognize what qualities do you bring, as a person that might be wanting to teach to children, whether that's your own children, children in your family, or going outwards, what are the qualities that you bring? And that's really important to kind of recognize and find your own style with it.